Hello YouTube, and welcome to my show, Sexism in Movies and TV. For 5 years I've been doing this show, and usually in a new seasonal intro, I give the reasons as to why I do it. Well, I've come up with some new reasons, in addition to the ones that I would give out in the last intro. I do this show to point out all of the horrible misandry, which means hatred of men and boys, that happens on mostly American TV and in American movies. But the really sad part of this whole thing is the fact that we're so desensitized to it that a lot of people can predict when it's coming. And what's even worse is that there are some people who actually find it funny. Okay, a new reason I thought of as to why this show must continue is because the toxic portrayal of men and boys that comes from American film and television is actually the one very big factor as to why men and boys basically have such low self-esteem. And the other half of the reason as to why stuff like this gives young men such low self-esteem is because we live in a world where stuff like this is constantly everywhere, all over the TV screens, all over the internet, all over social media. And if a young man or boy is not in a relationship, assuming he's 13 or older, his peers will instantly start picking on him and calling him gay. Then throw in the fact that there are absolutely no positive male role models on TV or in movies for the most part, and when some actually do appear, these insane feminists will instantly label it toxic masculinity and do whatever they can to make sure that it's ripped off the air and essentially replaced by their own pro-feminist, anti-man, anti-boy propaganda. Another reason why I do this show is to point out the fact that the corporations who make these movies and shows, they want to gain social brownie points. Which is why in most Western franchises there are no positive male role models. They seek to gain social brownie points by essentially trading old stereotypes for new ones. They think they're being progressive when they're not. They just exchanged good archetypes for bad archetypes. And they do this to be progressive and get social brownie points. And it usually ends like this. And the third and final reason as to why I do this show is because the portrayal of men and boys, not just in movies and TV, but in all media, has become horrific. To the point where it's downright dehumanizing. And I could see some kid's little sister treating him like bullshit because the characters she watches on TV treat the men and boys around them like bullshit. And it could either lead to this boy becoming abusive towards his sister, or developing really low self-esteem. So anyways, in closing, this show exists to point out the horrible misandry that has infected movies and TV. Now, with that said, on with the review. Okay, in this episode of Sexism in Movies and TV, I'm going to be reviewing the Season 9 episode of The Simpsons, Lisa the Simpson, in which I will explain how this is a completely forced premise, and how doing an episode like this kind of affects the series, and it would be best if there was something in a later season that said this episode wasn't canon. This is gonna be one of those reviews where I give this unwatchable piece of crap a quick overview, and then I explain every single detail wrong with it. Okay, the episode begins with Lisa unable to solve a puzzle, and essentially, when Ralph Wiggum, the village idiot, offers her a hint, she explodes at him. Apparently, that puzzle, and not being able to solve it, even though it was done in a dialect that you probably wouldn't know about in second grade, and would have to have passed a course in college to understand, not being able to solve it got Lisa so worked up she forgot to do her agriculture project. So she actually makes one up on the spot, and her teacher doesn't like it. And this blow to Lisa's confidence, ego, actually has her so worked up that she can't even play proper jazz. And when Lisa says that she feels like she's getting dumber by the minute, essentially after what was a hit to her massive ego, her senile grandpa, who the show actually goes out of its way to mention in all of his appearances, is senile and his memory is not trustable, says that all Simpsons become idiots around age 8. Then Rip Van Senile here essentially tells her about the Simpson gene. Something that is obviously him being senile and coming from delusion. Lisa is depressed and begins to have sick fantasies of what her future would be like. After leaving the jazz hole, Lisa encounters a woman whose jazz really got through to her. I have no clue how that works. And she tells Lisa and tells her that if she has something special to say, then say it to the world. This essentially boosts Lisa's massive ego. And this woman just wanted to sell Lisa a tape of her crappy music. So anyways, Lisa goes to Channel 6 News and tells them she wants to be on the news in an actual important discussion. The guy says she needs to be against a proposal. She's against proposal 305A, despite not knowing what it even is. And when she goes on air, she instantly goes off topic and basically tells the world that she's about to become a moron, even though she already is one, basically in a way that's completely egocentric, as if this is some horrible tragedy. She's putting it up on the same level as a school shooting. Oh, and just for the record, Homer knew what Proposition 301A was. Lisa didn't even know. Homer tries to cheer Lisa up with a family reunion, and it doesn't work. Then it suddenly works when she finds out she's related to a doctor. Lisa's ego is essentially skyrocketing again because of... She does solve the puzzle at the end of the episode, and they said that only the males are affected by the Simpson gene, even though future episodes will basically say that that is by no means true, based on the content of said episode. In all fairness, this is the kind of episode that is not canon. I mean, when you look at future seasons, there's no way it could be. I mean, Bart Simpson accomplishes more in 10 seasons of the show than Lisa could in 3. And they're not accomplishments that came out of a desire for an ego boost, or that came about by an accident, or out of receiving favoritism. Usually when Bart Simpson accomplishes something, it's either out of a desire to make money, or a desire to make Homer look like an idiot. Now, this is the part of the video where I bring up every single thing wrong with the episode and point out why it's wrong. But 1. Bart Simpson is by no means as stupid as this episode tries to make him out. I mean, you can't have episodes like Bart Gets an F, where he strives for self-improvement, or have him actually have a hero-villain rivalry with Sideshow Bob, because 1, it would not make sense as chronologically Bart Simpson's intelligence had been shown in the past. And I don't mean in flashbacks, I mean in episodes that occurred before Lisa the Simpson. And two, the Simpsons' big hidden fact, the one that is clearly obvious and shown by means of continuity, the one that Matt Goring and everyone else who worked on this show tries to sweep under the rug, is the fact that Bart is actually smarter than Lisa. Bart Simpson is the town hero. Lisa Simpson is basically just an egomaniac who only got straight A's because no one actually ever checks her work, and therefore could never have degenerated into a moron. I mean, episodes that occur after Lisa the Simpson actually show him being way more intelligent than she is. Okay, number 2. The future timeline episodes are not canon. I mean, say what you will, but they are definitely not canon. In fact, we had one peering into an alternate future back when Matt Goring was still working on this show, and any event in that episode would kind of have to apply to all these for any of them to be canon. I mean, hell, there are alternate timelines where Bart Simpson becomes a judge, and Lisa basically dies doing some yoga thing, assumingly after she realizes she wasted her life and is still running from taking responsibility for some company that crumbled because of her poor decisions. Okay, number 3. The fact that Grandpa Simpson his words cannot be trusted. He's old, he's senile, and he doesn't even know what he's talking about half the time. I mean, in this image here, he's convinced that either the dog or the cat is the mailman. This is not the kind of character who you can take seriously. You can't essentially take his words as foreshadowing. He's not the kind of character you use for that. Okay, and now for number 3, let's tackle Lisa's anti-character development. I actually blame this episode for Lisa Simpson being the way she is now. When the show started, she was either a goody two-shoes, a parody of a goody two-shoes, the show's moral compass and or conscience, or probably one or all of the above. But this episode was essentially the one that started somewhat of a domino effect, and, well, like I said, anti-character development. Most of the episodes that featured Lisa as the main character were basically about her going on some kind of ego trip to try and prove just how smart she is. Or when she's not doing that, she's basically doing something that would appeal to her insane concept of morality. Either that, or she's bathing herself in hypocrisy. Lisa converted to Buddhism only because the church allowed Mr. Burns to run it like a business, and actually improved its quality and the number of people who showed up to church. You see, Lisa Simpson is a hypocrite because she goes on and on and on about how corporations are run by evil white guys, and that's wrong, but at the same exact time, she thinks women should run companies and wants to run one when she grows up. And the very last thing that is wrong with this episode is the fact that despite Lisa's massive ego, Simpsons isn't Dexter's lab and never will be. In fact, bringing up Dexter's lab actually adds a lot of insight into this review, as that show actually did this exact same storyline. They did it first, I'm pretty sure they did, and they definitely did it better. In one episode, because of a grading mistake, the school calls Dexter's dad and tells him that his son isn't a genius. Hearing this actually sends Dexter into a complete identity crisis, but after the error was fixed and his dad was called a second time, and they told him that Dexter was a genius, well, that just reset everything, and it was far more interesting. It wasn't an ego boost, because Dexter's entire character centered around him being a genius. I mean, imagine if he was an average kid. I mean, everything we saw in the show prior would have made absolutely no sense, because the show in no way implied that anything that Dexter did fell into the realm of imagination. It was very real in the context of that universe. And making Dexter actually turn out to be an average kid would probably be the ultimate retcon on Cartoon Network's part. And by the quality of this episode, if The Simpsons ever tried to be Dexter's Lab, it would instantly become Johnny Test. Something that everyone hates. Or at least everyone with a goddamn brain. In closing, I stand firm in my opinion that Lisa the Simpson was the episode that essentially took Lisa's character away from being what a goody two-shoes, a parody of a goody two-shoes, a moral compass, or whatever she was supposed to be, and essentially turned her into a complete egomaniac who who attached her giant ego to intelligence, and is so goddamn petty that she will essentially break as many laws as possible to keep up, to make it look like she's not an idiot. It was Lisa the Simpson that began this spiral of Lisa kind of being a normal girl, but then degenerated her into an egotistical, man-hating, feminist asshole. And at this point, she's the least likable out of all the characters. Hell, Frank Grimes in Sideshow Bob, a one-time character and Bart's arch-nemesis, are more likable than Lisa Simpson, a member of the main family, the family that the show focuses on. And it all started with this episode.